Morning, everybody. How we doing today? It's Friday morning. Upper Midwest, cold, stormy night last night. A lot of rain and a little bit of thunder, but nothing crazy like that. But it came down like an English rainstorm for a while. I thought I was at Puddleby on the Marsh for a minute. Anybody remember what Puddleby on the Marsh is? Bonus points to y'all. I'm just gonna touch on the personal thing for a second. Send prayers to my wife. I know she's going through a tough time and she's in a hole she's having a hard time digging out of, and I don't know what I can do at this point. There's a part of me concerned that someday she's gonna be like, "Why didn't you come for me?" But I don't think if I did it would do any good. She has to kind of want to get that help herself. It's an insurmountable pain at times, watching someone you love be consumed by drugs and bad choices. It's amazing how long you can go without seeing it because you love somebody. My heart's with her. I'm feeling less stress every day because I'm getting more removed from the drama of what she had created. Just daily, is she gonna do what she said she's gonna do today, or is she gonna lie to me? Like that. The last year, there was a lot of suspicious behavior that triggered old patterns with me with other exes that were addicts, and it's so anyway. Send prayers for her. I have no ill will towards her. I don't think she ever meant to. No one says, "Oh, today I'm gonna go up and change the path of my life and start doing drugs." So I hope and pray somehow she can get back to being the lioness that she once was. She ran a homeless center through a pandemic and got little thanks for it. Put her life and her family's life at risk. And by the end of it, she was so distraught and had been thrown under the bus so many times by various entities that she felt very defeated. And I think she's had a real hard time getting back on the path. Today I've pulled a fun 6-pack of records. I want to show you a few things I've been listening to first, just because I can. Budos Band. Walked into a Chicago record store when I was there last month, and I'm like, "Is that Budos playing?" And recognized it right away. Their signature sound is a bit Scooby-Doo funk. It's fun. It's not. Even this record, which has a lot of dark chords and tones, it's still got this fun pulse that it's a mystery van. It's an exciting modern proto-funk, organically produced, the Daptone label. Some of these guys I believe back Sharon Jones. I know a lot of those groups are kind of integrated on that label. I have most of the early Daptone stuff, like the first 30 some releases on vinyl, and then I kind of lost contact with it. But the Budos Band first, second records are both outstanding. This is their third one. It's really an outstanding Sabbath meets Curtis Mayfield. The funk is there. There's some rock elements in this one especially. But at the end of the day, it just ends up being like a mystery van kind of. It's fun. I love Budos. I had to give some love to that. The other day we were in the store. I had a friend saying they had a trip planned to New Orleans. It got canceled because of some work commitments. He said, "Play something fun in New Orleans for me." So I pulled out some Meters records. And those of you who aren't familiar with the Meters, Sissy Strut was kind of their biggest number. Look Up High Pie was a big hit as well in the R&B charts. But Sissy Strut you'll actually hear in films and soundtracks and stuff. But just early, sparse, minimal, organic, fairly instrumental funk. And JB's I think James Brown, of course, is the architect, but these guys were on their own doing a fantastic thing. And they're certainly iconic and probably deserve a little more recognition today than they get. A few fun jazz lessons I just had to mention that aren't part of today's 6-pack, but I played it today for a customer who requested it. And, it was just, wow. I really enjoyed it. Jim Hall's fantastic on it. A lot of the numbers here are fairly iconic, but still, it's one of the finest jazz records on the RCA label. And RCA is late to the game. Like, this is 62, if I remember. And, I mean, by this time, Columbia has done a lot of great jazz records. And RCA is just a little bit stodgy, a little bit more old-fashioned. I think their clientele was a little bit built more towards older middle America. Columbia's a little bit more forward-thinking and willing to be risky and modern. And so Columbia by this time has Monk, has Mingus. Miles has been there for 5 years at this point. I mean, so Columbia is light years ahead of RCA at this point. Capitol never gets too deep. I mean, the Stan Kenton Presents series has some pretty great cool bop stuff. And, I mean, there's Kind of Blue, again, that's a real misnomer, because Kind of Blue was recorded much, much earlier, 4950, and it was really not even a Miles Davis session per se. It was a collection of guys, Gil Evans, Lee Konitz, the very important Jerry Mulligan. I mean, Miles was, of course, a part of those sessions, and there was J.J. Johnson. It's a pretty amazing lineup of guys that were part of Birth of the Cool, but it wasn't even really called that at the time. It was something that got repackaged by Capitol once Miles was becoming successful, and they're like, oh, we should probably put that back out. And I think you kind of early on, as a Miles collector, you find Birth of the Cool fairly quickly. And, I mean, the Birth of the Cool title, it's a fantastic name. I mean, it's a great name for the record. And it does, of course, embody the music to some degree, but there's as much third stream and hints of avant-garde and hints of a lot of composition and arrangement in the Birth of the Cool stuff that, I mean, Cool is not exactly what Birth of the Cool is, which is kind of a strange misnomer, like I said. But it's Capitol really wasn't being cutting edge, and doesn't really ever get too cutting edge. They're happier releasing Dean Martin and Louis Prima records, I mean, which swing hard. And I mean, there's some fine stuff on Capitol. A lot of it I love dearly, but it's just when you think about the real hardcore jazz records that Columbia is doing, the Jazz Messenger stuff, the Donald Byrd stuff. I mean, Horor Silver. Columbia is doing some real jazz, and RCA for the most part isn't. Capitol for the most part isn't. Decca by this point is slipping into obscurity and about to fold their doors up here in America and return this to being a British label. But The Bridge is such a great record, and it's an interesting lineup. Rollins is in fine form. Just a great record that you can find for a decent price, to be honest. The fantastic Eddie Davis. This is an old record on the King label. King's out of Cincinnati. They're the ones who ended up buying a Bethlehem and putting a bunch of black music out on the Bethlehem imprint. In the early 60s, that's not the same house as what Bethlehem was doing in 54, 55, 56. I mean, they're very different parts of the Bethlehem canon. Old King, the vinyl always has a bit of a funny feel to it. Just a great old label, very centric around race records, black music, the blues, R&B, jump blues, all those early proto versions of rock and R&B. King's dabbling in all that. Organ jazz becomes fairly prominent here with Bill Doggett. But Lockjaw does 3 or 4 fantastic sessions for King in like 56, 57 in there somewhere. And they're just great records. They're very black. They're very black church. They're very baked beans and Spanish rice. It's just like simple elemental stuff that it's never going to like be too forward. Again, Lockjaw is renowned for having not been a guy who could read music. He just played by feel, by ear. There's a great organ player on this, and I'm trying to remember who it is. It's a little dark in here right now, and my eyes aren't what they used to be. But anyway, Eddie Davis, Lockjaw on the King label. Now, one more thing I want to show you real quick is Jazz Crusaders. Actually, 2 more things. This Jazz Crusaders record I played the other day, it's probably their 3rd title on Pacific. And this is before they became the Crusaders. This is their earlier days. Wilton Felder, Nesbitt, Sticks Hooper, Wayne Henderson, Joe Sample. So kind of an iconic group. I think they came out of Texas initially, and they are actually very cool. Although, don't get me wrong, this is a pretty hard swinging record. I was really impressed by it. They really are throwing down. The bone playing is just fantastic. It's really a great session by a band that really cooked. It was really tight, and I mean, it's live jazz at its finest. It's just four guys that are very much interloping and understand each other's contexts and places and spaces in mind, and just are giving each other the room to breathe. And I mean, I think most people would be hard pressed to know what this is just hearing it, but I think once they heard it and you get it for $5, I mean, anyone walks in the room is gonna be like, "That's fucking great jazz. What is that?" It's very accessible, very melodic, thumping, grooving, cooking. It's what jazz needs to be more, honestly. It's so much promotion goes out to difficult jazz that drives people away from the music. And if we could only get people to listen to more fun jazz, and fun jazz has just as much to say. The fun jazz is the stuff that's overcoming the turmoil and making me rejoice and feel freedom in spite of this bondage. And remember, this is music rooted in oppression. It's a music rooted in tyranny. This music was a release of that stress and that strain. And so the intellectual, spiritual jazz that we monikered it, that comes in the 60s, a lot of that's post-civil rights even. Some of it's during civil rights for sure, but a lot of it comes later, the spiritual jazz in the 70s. I mean, and not to say that civil rights solved all the issues, it doesn't, but it's more of an intellectual, cerebral exercise at that point. And to me, less of a spiritual conquest, a crusade of survival. Fantastic stuff. On the other end of the spectrum, also on the Pacific label, is Bud Shank. And we're going to get to today's six-pack after this. But me and John Michel talked about Bud Shank recently, how great his catalog is. He's a flautist. He played alto. He's just a great player, great producer and arranger. He has his name on a lot of projects. And he does probably at least 20 titles on the Pacific label. Then they become World Pacific. And, I mean, he's an institution at that label for a long time. Some of his records that came in the 60s, like the Michel record, sold millions of copies from what I can tell, because they're in nearly every jazz bin that you'll ever look through. I mean, jazz records didn't sell millions of copies very often, but I bet you that Bud Shank record sold upwards close to that, because it's one of the most prevalent jazz records you'll see out there. So he's a pretty popular name that's kind of slipped into obscurity, which has happened to a lot of the great white players. The great white players' records sold so well, they had better distribution, they toured colleges that were the major U.S. colleges. And so the white jazz artists always had a better career at the time, but it's made their records more affordable and more out there and accessible. And so they're only going for $5-10, so no one thinks that they're any good. And price doesn't indicate quality. I mean, it just doesn't. What determines the price of most jazz records is just how rare was that pressing, how small was that label's output, and how few copies did they press of most of their things, and how many times those records have been repressed. And so that's why we end up talking about pressing so damn much. But it has no indication of the value of the music. And Bud Shank can play with the best of them. Seriously, one of the greatest players of any era. This is a soundtrack to a film, Slippery When Wet. So it's got a little bit more composition than some of his stuff does. But he's always got a compositional European edge to him. But, I mean, Bud Shank, Jean Michel, I mean, we both love Bud Shank's work. And I think Jean Michel knew him, actually, if I recall. Now we're going to get to what we're listening to today. The great Jimmy Rawls, the great piano player, in the great Ken Burns documentary, which I'm a huge fan of. People want to slag it. I think it's the best place for people to jump into jazz and get to know it. It's a fantastic documentary. 18-20 hours of American history that gives context and the racial component, and like the story of jazz is as important as the notes that are being played and the artists who are playing them. And I think that Ken Burns documentary does a great job of telling a lot of that story. And in that process, they're forced to omit some artists, especially towards the later era of the music. But by that time, most of those artists were very peripheral and weren't selling. As much as I like Hank Mobley, looking at that story narrative now, Hank Mobley doesn't deserve too much time in that documentary. He's a small part and sold very few records in his lifetime. And I love Hank. He's probably my favorite tenor player. I love him. But just in historical context, Ellington and Armstrong are far bigger parts of the story. You know, I mean, it's just Parker's a huge part of it. Billie Holiday is a bigger part of the story. And the Burns documentary does such a great job of telling the first 40 years of the music. And once the 60s come along, it picks and chooses, you know what I mean, and tells a few people's stories and condenses some of the great artists like Monk and Mingus into smaller segments. But, I mean, it was 20 hours as it was. And is there a need for a documentary to come along and really cover jazz post 1960, 1965, 1970? Probably. I'd be less interested in it. I mean, the ECM modern jazz that feels like elevator music to me. And I mean, I'd probably watch it, to be honest, but certainly it doesn't interest me like the stuff from this era. But Jimmy Ross, anyway, great piano player, played with with Billie Holiday, backed up a lot of people as an accompanist to singers. Just a great, delicate touch. He's playing here in a West Coast scene on the Andex label with the great Bill Holman, Stan Kenton alumni, Herb Geller, Woody Herman, Mel Lewis, the drummer, Bob Envelson, the Montana-born bone player. I mean, he's the only Montana jazz player that I know of. So that sticks out in your memory when you're doing research on people. Lee Katzman and Monty Budwig. So it's a pretty great lineup of West Coast guys on the Andex label, Andex number 3007. A little West Coast label that does maybe a dozen titles that are jazzy and worth collecting. By some great West Coast talent, no question about it, including guys like Conte Condoli. Next on our listening today is going to be the great Horor Silver. And I don't play Horor Silver enough in spite of how much I love Horor Silver. He is the sound of Blue Note. He's the softer, slightly more melodic side to Blakey's ferocious fury side. And remember, the Jazz Messengers were Horor Silver and Art Blakey to begin with, along with Bird and Mobley and Doug Watkins, that first lineup. And there's even earlier iterations of the Blakey Messengers, I mean, with the Clifford Brown and Lou Donaldson, but was that Jazz Messenger kind of assigned to that a little bit later? I think it was. I don't think it was an officially a Jazz Messenger band at that point, but it served the same purpose, and it is kind of an extension forward or backward, I guess you should say, of the Jazz Messengers and Blakey's crew and the ensemble of people that he was putting out there into the world and giving exposure to. Blakey's the greatest institution in that era of jazz, without question. You know what I mean? To what he is to the 50s, mid 50s, late 60s, what guys like Lionel Hampton and Dizzy Gillespie were to even Earl Hines to the 40s. I mean, how they signed so many young black kids, and how AC and Ellington, I mean, guys like that were in the 20s and 30s. These were the proving grounds, you know, and Horor Silver and Blakey, that early Messenger crew, and then Blakey and Horace kind of split their ways. And my guess is, and I've heard some intimations of this, but I'm not positive, but I do think the split was largely because of Blakey's addiction. Blakey was a powerful heroin addict and almost pushed it on some of his players at times, maybe to get them to a place where he was. I don't think Horace was kind of quite as evangelical about the need to be on horse. And I mean, that's a little conjecture on my part, but I do feel like I've heard intimations of that. And Silver always seemed far more straight edge. You don't hear a lot of legend of Silver's exploits on the contents of chemicals. But fantastic band here. He has a band that works with him for quite a while here with, well, actually this is prior to that group, but you have Cliff Jordan, the great Art Farmer, Teddy Kotick, and Louis Hayes. And what's interesting about that band is, again, not many of these guys are really Blue Note stable guys. Hayes does some sessions as a drummer on Blue Note. Teddy Kotick shows up a few places as a bass player. Art Farmer's on a few records with Hank Mobley and a few other early to mid 50s records as a sideman on Blue Note. But it's not a real traditional Blue Note lineup, really. And Cliff Jordan, he has a couple pieces at Blue Note, but he's not long for the Blue Note canon catalog either, stable. Fantastic piece. I'm looking forward to playing it. I haven't played it in a while. And Silver records never disappoint. They just don't. Then we pulled the Sonny Stitt record. And what I do when I go to these cabinets, pull these 6-packs, each cabinet I'm just kind of blind pulling. I'll kind of go, okay, I haven't picked from that shelf in a while, that label, and I'll pull it. This is the Argo I pulled out, the great Sonny Stitt. I love Sonny Stitt's work at Argo, his work at that studio they record all his chess stuff. Chess, Cadet, Argo, all same label. Blues and black Chicago music. One of the great institutions of the Chicago music industry is the Chess Brothers and Argo and Cadet and Checker and all the different imprints that they created for black music. And they were renowned jerks. Phil and Leonard Chess weren't reported to be very nice guys, quite racist, but all the same, their body of work between those labels, the Argo stuff is just some of the greatest Midwest blues-driven black jazz music you're going to hear. It's comparable to anything happening anywhere on any other label. even though the names are going to be slightly more obscure to most of us, it doesn't diminish what those guys in the Midwest were blowing. They're blowing hard. And a lot of these guys like Stitt, Clifford Jordan, Johnny Griffin, they end up migrating to the East Coast to labels like Blue Note and Riverside anyway. So you're hearing them in their kind of earlier moments of their career, along with the great Ahmad Jamal and Ramsey Lewis. Like, Argo's such a just you see an old Argo, get it. I swear to you, the first 150 titles, which start at 600 and run to like 655 or something, that's all incredible music, all of it. And they switched to Cadet at that point because of a lawsuit with a British label called Argo, which was more of a classical Irish Celtic music label. But they had to forego using that name, and they switched to Cadet. And they keep the number sequence contiguous. So just says 756 or 757, somewhere in there, it goes to Cadet. And by that time, the label has switched more to rhythm and blues, more to blues-driven jazz sound, kind of a honky-tonk sound at times, a lot of organ stuff. And I still love Cadet jazz. I still love Cadet records. But the Argo stuff, which 56, a little 55, but it's both 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, that 150 records or so that they do, it's Chicago to the root. It's dirty, it's grimy, it's blue collar, it's windy, it's big shoulders, cold wind off the lake, but we're going to warm things up here tonight. Like it cooks. Stitt, wonderful player, switched between the alto and tenor in his career. So he's not the kind of guy that we usually like play both on a record. It was like he kind of was on the alto for a while, a number of years, switched to tenor for a number of years, kind of went back to the alto, from my memory and understanding of it. I mean, sometimes I get so much of my information jumbled. Hopefully most of what I'm telling you is correct recalling. My mind has had a lot on it the last 6 months, and it's nice sometimes to refresh some of the stuff, just going through my record shelves and flipping through things and just recurring some of the magic that is the label discographies. Then the great Howard McGee. Howard McGee is seriously one of the most underrated and forgotten trumpet players of the bebop era, probably along with Fats Navarro. I mean, you get Dizzy, you get Clifford, you have all the great talent, even Young Miles coming up. I mean, there's a lot of real notorious trumpet players that came up in the 50s. A lot. Morgan, Dorham, I mean, it's Freddie Hubbard. The list is endless of great trumpet players that came up in that era. And Howard McGee is there at the very beginning at Minton's Playhouse playing bebop with the Cats. He's a serious dude who doesn't have the post-career legacy that most of his contemporaries do. But he should get more recognition. His work at Bethlehem is outstanding. He has probably 3 full lengths there. There might be a 10-inch too, I can't recall. But Howard McGee's body of work is some Savoy stuff that's really good as well. He's really an underrated player that can play with a lot of ferocity and a lot of bebop dexterity, but also plays a wonderful blues ballad and has a soft, sentimental tone. He's not the brightest and edgiest sound, but he's not cloudy and milky either. He's still a clear tone guy, but boy, he can really blow. And Life is a Bowl of Cherries, which was a pretty famous song at the time. I have some interesting versions of that song. See if we can read who plays on this one in there. Okay, Ola's on the guitar on some of this. That's fantastic. O.C. Johnson, Don Larkin, Herbie Mann's on some of this. Danny Bank, the baritone player's on some of this. Pretty good lineup. Great stuff. There's Howard McGee. Look him up online. You'll see him standing outside of Minton's Playhouse next to Monk and the boys. Truly a guy that needs more recognition. Another guy from the same area was kind of forgotten is Wilber Harden. Harden's a great player. Another great trumpet player, playing with Tommy Flanagan, George Vivi, and J.T. Hogan. This is one of those cool Savoy records from probably 59, 58, 50, 60, in there somewhere, 12, 134. This is the end of the Savoy run of recording good, modern, cutting-edge jazz. They're only going to make another 20 titles or so after this, maybe 30, before they really kind of switch over to rhythm blues and gospel music for the most part, and organ records, and they really just continue following jazz. Part of it, I think, was the direction jazz was going, the sales that jazz was having. Lubinsky and crew were just like, let's just go a different direction. And jazz was in decline by the early 60s without question. But Wilber Harden, great player. He's a guy that you just don't hear enough about. And I like his work. He doesn't have a lot as a leader. And he shows up some as a sideman, but he really is kind of buried in this lot of great trumpet players at the time. Nice old Savoy. Oh, it was nice to see those old Savoy pressings. And then last but not least, we got some old ladies in there today. I pulled this out. Stan Getz, Gilberto number 2. Pretty sure this was live. Yeah, live at Carnegie Hall. This whole series of records with Getz and Bossa Nova stuff, some of the most fantastic music ever recorded. And I wouldn't hesitate if the aliens were to show up at my door and say, hey, we've heard you got a lot of music. Show us what humanity sounds like. This wouldn't be a bad choice. I mean, it's got African, Brazilian, American, Black history, all kind of wrapped up into this formula that's really enjoyable. And some of the sounds of the sand and the beaches in the Caribbean and the coast of the Atlantic coast of Brazil, of course, and Ipanema beaches, and but it just seems to embody all that. Water, sun, and sand. Yet, there's a soft breeze. It's not too hot and sticky. The music just has an airiness and a breathiness to it that's delightful. And there's certain things that will always be dinner party music. And these records on Verve, the Bossa Nova records, will always be dinner party music. You can't go wrong. If you're playing it for a wedding, if you're playing it for just a gathering of elites, marvelous, darling. Pass me the champagne. Where's my monocle? Ah, there it is. The music's wonderful, darling. Pass me the wine with your velvet gloves. I mean, that kind of bourgeoisie, but from a third world place. The way we graft the music of the oppressed, the art of the oppressed, and apply it to the bourgeoisie upper class at times. It's an interesting juxtaposition of the soul of those who are in pain having something that echoed and rung true to those who are at least in part to blame for the pain that those people suffer from. All of us here live at the expense of the 95%. If you're listening to this in Western Europe, if you're listening to this in Japan, if you're listening to this in Canada, America, to some degree, the boot that we keep on most of the world's neck elevates the standards of living that we can live at. And it keeps diminishing the amount of empathy that we're going to have for those third world places in the media, so that they're not, that exploitation of those places never ceases. And all the talk about woke and concern about things, until we start talking about global economics and equalizing the playing field, and on some degree, stop making the different properties on the monopoly board so disparate. Because you got 8 billion living on Baltic, or even off Baltic, and you have a fraction of a percent living on Park Place and Boardwalk. And we could probably all live much happier somewhere over on Connecticut with unity in healthcare and education, empathy for all, let the world's resources be the engine that feeds us and educates us and spiritually elevates us. Because the hate and divide prevents spirituality from being a thing. This phony religion that people adhere to that divides us, that's not spirituality. Judging other people's religion, sexuality, race, customs, that's as far from spirituality as you can be. So it's about embracing and understanding how great the human context is. And a record like this is very human. It has elements of so many places and cultures filtered through it that when you take it in, you're imbibing planet Earth. And if you're from a far-off reaching galaxy and you're coming here to go, what is planet Earth about? The Bossa Nova would be a fantastic, the good Bossa Nova. You don't want to give them some schlocky, but the good stuff, It's ethereal. It's ethereal. And I'd probably follow it up with some Johnny Hartman, because the baritone is such a wonderful, I mean, you can't beat Johnny Hartman, especially on those Impulse records. But even his early stuff on Regent and Roost, Hartman's just an icon. But, I mean, fantastic stuff. And you asked me on 10 different days what I would play for the aliens when they come. You'd probably get a different answer most every day. But, I mean, this wouldn't be a bad place to start. So anyway, appreciate you all. If you want to support the channel, please subscribe. Hit the like button. If you want to pledge to the channel, please go to my Patreon in the description below. I need your support right now with the wife being gone and absent. Any type of donation right now is appreciated. Help me keep the mortgage and the lights on. I'm working on fixing up the basement, trying so I can rent it out to someone, which will help. But it's still a scramble right now. I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to replace her income, which was 30% of the finances here. And that's a big thing to fill on my own. And so every penny, every dollar, every pledge is appreciated and welcomed. And may it bring good blessings back to you. And it's not even going to be buying music at this point. I can't afford to buy music. It's just going for me to stay afloat until I get my bridge repaired. She blew it up. And there's a part of me that's got more anger in it than I'm kind of revealing to people. But the anger is not a healthy thing to dwell in. And forgiveness allows me to kind of move forward. Resentment keeps you in a negative place and it weighs you down. It's harder to move forward when you carry bitterness, anger, and resentment. So I do believe in forgiveness, and I don't think when you forgive someone, you're letting them off the hook, because they have to still deal with their own conscience. When you forgive someone, you're letting yourself off the hook of carrying that load. And you're saying, I don't want to be negative and miserable and in a bitter place. And those feelings come. There's still moments where I go upstairs and I'll see things and I'm like, fuck, bitch. Damn. Why'd she fuck our shit up? You know? But I still love her and pray for her and hope that she gets figured out. And if not, there's some other woman out there that wants a partner that's got some spirituality and depth. I mean, the pickings ain't that great when you're in your 50s, so I got to be up there somewhere in the pantheon of eligible men in this area, you would think. But again, I don't really fit in. I'm definitely an outsider. And that's only true for 60% of the population. I mean, because the other 40% are pretty much outsiders as well, or liberals. But that being aside, all your support is appreciated greatly, and I appreciate you all for watching this channel. Again, thanks to Jazz Bomb for having me last time. It was just a blast. I love you guys. I love your passion and your knowledge for the music. I want to say a shout out to Ken McAuliffe again, dear friend. We've chatted many times over the years. Great guy. I haven't heard from you much lately. Hope you're doing well, my friend. He's the guy who kind of got me on YouTube in the first place, a good 3-4 years back. So I always do appreciate his input and his push to get me to do this. So I do enjoy this channel a lot. And being able to share with you, it's a bit therapeutic for me, honestly. It's a chance to talk and almost be on the couch myself at times. And so thank you all for your support and your comments and your feedback, and those who have financially pledged, but also those who have pledged just emotional support. And, I mean, every fist bump exchanges a little energy, gives me a little power, little juice. And I think I shared last week that this friend of mine in Chicago, Robert Jackson, drove up. Black fireman from the south side of Chicago, 62 years old. Had a great time hanging with him. And again, it just reiterates what this place is about. It's not just about selling coffee and t-shirts and trying to make money. And it's important to pay the bills, but it's also important to live life and be fulfilled and have a temple where you can come and consecrate yourself and be humbled by this great art. And that goes for the art of the funk and the soul and the hip hop and even some of the great classic rock. I mean, a lot of this art is so interconnected. You can't separate some of it. And if you love Chuck Berry, you gotta love the Rolling Stones. If you love the Rolling Stones, you gotta love Chuck Berry. If you like Paul McCartney, Bill Richards should be in your wheelhouse. I mean, it's like the connections are all so tactile and it's not abstract. Great music is timeless. And that's the ultimate measuring stick of great, is time. There's many a song that comes along and seems great for the moment, but in time is discarded to the wayside. But the great music, the innovative stuff, the stuff that really has a spirit and a consciousness and a guiding light, I mean, even some of the great Bee Gees songs are great songs. You're More Than a Woman. I mean, what's that? Cause we're living in a world of fools holding us down. Should let us be. That song, such a beautiful melody. Al Green does a couple covers of Bee Gees songs that I'm just like, this is fantastic. It's like stripped down Memphis blues, gospel versions of the Bee Gees. Anyway, y'all be safe. Have a great day. Much love to all y'all. We're trying to get back on the horse and be as positive as we can be. Life has the challenges. You just got to climb those hills. So I got some riding boots to put on. I got some hills to climb. Got some coffee to sell today. And keep being your thoughts and prayers, honestly. But I feel pretty elevated and pretty strong, all things considered. I have a great support network around me of friends, YouTube family. I mean, my own family. It's been pretty overwhelming how much support and love I've gotten. The old bandmates have reached out. So it's, I mean, I didn't live in a village that was macheted by mercenaries. I mean, I didn't watch my child get lynched. There's a sorrow that's in this world far greater than the struggle I'm dealing with. And it's maybe it's a cliche, but it does help me not feel too sorry for myself. We've all faced heartache. So on that note, be strong, be safe. Talk to y'all soon. Peace.